There are products in the market that cause cancer, affect our reproductive system, and lead to autoimmune diseases. There are products in the market that pose a risk to our bee populations and other important pollinators for food production. The food we are consuming, including fruits and vegetables that we all believe to be healthy, is likely to have harmful pesticide residues. Our farmers, who often cannot afford protective gear or are not trained on how to use these chemicals safely, are at risk. 32% of the active ingredients registered for use in Kenya are not allowed in Europe. And so why should we allow them in our country? Most of the pesticides we use in Kenya are imported from Europe. We are growing organic food for export, but are seemingly less concerned about the quality of food made available to our own people. This is not acceptable.
Well, 32% of our food is not acceptable in Europe, raising pertinent questions there. Let me bring in Madam Alice Kemunto. When we talk about such issues facing food safety, I'd like to hear from you. How can consumers actually protect themselves from consuming harmful food, and what do we stand to gain when we look at the legislative framework in place?
Thank you, Abby. As it's been indicated, it's true that the research came out clear that most of the food, the pesticides that we are using here in Kenya are imported from Europe. And some of the substances that are there, some of the components that are there have been already withdrawn in the markets in Europe. And there's this application of double standards. And we stand to ask ourselves, is Kenya a dumping site? Is this a place that whatever that is produced in Europe, and actually the companies that sell here, they are the ones that import them from Europe, and some producers that produce in Europe, that where they are not sold, they are being sold in Kenya. So we ask ourselves, is this a dumping site? And this is one of the questions consumers should ask themselves here. So that comes to how can they protect themselves? One, consumers need to know their rights. They need to know that they have a right to safe food. In Article 43C of our Constitution, it's very clear that they have a right to save food, and that right, no one can take it from them. Article 46 is very clear about the rights of consumers. Consumer Protection Act, we have Competition Act, and at the same time, we have other legislations that are protecting consumers. But I just want to let the consumers know that once they know their rights, we also remind them as Consumer Grassroots Association and also the umbrella body called Consumer Voice of Kenya, we are of the view that consumers have a right that is supposed to be protected, and the matters food safety, and especially the toxic business that in this country is supposed to trigger a national dialogue. And this dialogue should be started by the Office of the President. Actually, matters to do with food security, food safety should be handled at the Office of the President. Why are we saying this? Look at COVID. When the Office of the President took it up, everybody's taking it serious. And that's why we are calling on the President, being consumer number 001, I hope he's listening to me right now, that we should take up the matters to do with safety very seriously. Otherwise, if you don't have these people safe, if they don't have good health, who are you going to lead anyway? And we are calling on our MPs, that petition that is in Parliament to be passed, because it's going to protect those who are voting for them, not only voting for them, but it's a human life that is being protected. So consumers need to know their rights, that's number one. Number two, they need to ask themselves, whatever they are consuming, where is it coming from? Some people are just, I don't know whether it's ignorance or what. You just see somebody growing spinach right down there at the sewage site, and you go pluck it from there, come and eat it. You need to know the traceability of the food that is being consumed in Kenya. It's very, very key. And I wonder that the food that we produce for export, we put in mechanisms to ensure that that food is safe. But whatever is consumed here in the country is not taken seriously. So we pause and ask ourselves, you consumers, us consumers, what do we take ourselves for? We need to come out and demand for that right that will never be taken away from us. And lastly, they need to know the standard marks. We have the bodies that are supposed to be taking care of the standards and also the quality of food that is being consumed here. Let consumers know the standard marks that are there in the food that they are purchasing. That way, a large number of consumers will be able to tell whether what they're consuming is good. Otherwise, our main and primary business as consumer organizations, as consumer grassroots associations, is to educate, is to help consumers understand their rights, but also their obligations. And part of the obligation is for them to tell their members of parliament, yes, it's now time to come out and sign for that petition so that we can be protected, because that law is the only that can help us to anchor ourselves there, to get rid of what is being dumped here, so that whatever we are producing can be saved, not only for us, but also for the environment, not only for us as human beings, but also for animals. We need to take care of that. Mother Nature is crying because of such activities that are happening here in this country. So if consumers know their rights, if they can be able to trace what they're eating, if they can demand for proper legislation, then they will be safe.
All right, Madam Kemunto, I can assure you the President has and continues to listen. Well, picking up from your comments, I'd like to bring in Dr. Catherine. So what are the allowed levels of pesticides that should be known to most of the viewers back home and to the farmers? And has the government done enough when it comes to sensitization?
Thank you, Abby. I think what is more important, and I think the Consumer Association person has brought this, is the right use of the pesticides. The MRLs are known, and I think the government, as we said, as the legal framework, we have a lot of regulatory agencies. But for me, the problem lies in terms of compliance and also enforcement of some of these laws, some of these MRLs. I'm thinking of a farmer like my mother at home. She doesn't know what MRLs are, what allowable limits are. I think a lot needs to be done to sensitize our farmers on the right use of pesticides. Because even with the regulated pesticides, I can tell you most farmers, our experience is they are not really educated. They are not aware on the right dosages to use of some of these pesticides. And remember, for each, we have a specific level that needs to be applied. But even when they apply at that level also, do they have the correct facilities, the correct personal protective gears to protect themselves? I've traveled to many field trips around the country. I see even women spraying chemicals on crops without any protection. We are talking of a mother who will later give birth to the next generation. I'm worried about the safety, the health of our next generation, because from our studies it shows that pesticides can cause things like mutagenic effects or teratogenic effect. This is when you affect the reproduction system such that the kids who are born in our future generation are not able to perform well. They are born with different defects. So basically for me is that the government really needs to put more effort through the different regulatory agencies, which should have also coordinated efforts to ensure that the farmers know the correct dosage levels to use for each chemical, because it's different for each, and for each pesticides. And not only pesticides, we have things like fungicides. And I'm a bit worried also, after harvest also, we have other chemicals that farmers are using or misusing that preserve the food or keep the food longer. And again, we are seeing a lot of chemicals being misused, some that are not supposed to be used at that level. Look at our traders during storage, during processing. A lot of food additives, you had the other day meat containing chemicals, you've had yogurt containing chemicals. I mean, for me, it's the whole entire value chain. We really need a strong national food control system that has a coordinated mechanism that can actually look at all these actors, all the way from our farmers. They are very important, being especially smallholder farmers, some with no education. They really have to be sensitized. How do I use this? Do I have the correct facilities? Do I have the correct PPEs? Do I know, for example, the pre-harvest interval? This is the interval. When you apply a chemical, you need to give the crop some time before you can harvest. Otherwise, the residues that we are talking about, when you harvest immediately after application, persist in that tomato that you're buying, persist in that kale that you're buying, and ends up being consumed by the consumer. Again, I've mentioned afterwards, post-harvest, we have also a lot of chemicals that farmers are using to preserve, because we do not have facilities at farm level for proper handling, proper storage of food. During transport, we have a lot of traders also abusing a lot of chemicals. You've seen bananas where people are using like calcium carbide, which is carcinogenic, is mutagenic. So if you look at entirely at the entire value chain, there's a lot of cause to worry, and a lot of it is because we've not put effort to regulate, to control, to coordinate all the efforts that we have through our regulatory agencies to ensure that there is controlled use of these chemicals. Some of them are not bad, I have to admit. I know some of us are going the organic way. But again, look at, on the other hand, some of these chemicals are actually used by farmers to increase yields. I sympathize with the farmers, yes, and they think the more you add, the better the yields. If you go to the market, the consumer actually wants to buy that tomato that looks big or that kale that looks big and shiny. But now they have come to know most of those have been grown using chemicals. So you see now farmers, for example, consumers, for example, now going for these small tomatoes that they prefer because they think that one has not, chemicals have not been used. So we are seeing consumers are aware of this, yes, but how can you be sure as a consumer that what you're buying in the market is actually contaminated or not? And this is not only chemicals, we also have microbial pathogens from irrigated water, the soils we use. So it's a whole range of worries that we need to sensitize our consumers, and I think it's the role of the government, and I wish that we had a competent authority that is independent, transparent, and open, that can actually coordinate all these efforts such that we can assure our final consumer that the product you're getting in the market is actually free from chemical residues, is free from microbial pathogens, nitrates, and all heavy metals that are of concern. So for me, Abby, I think the buck lies or stops with the government through the regulatory agencies, but also all the actors in the food value chains have a responsibility in food safety to ensure that what we consume is actually free from these residues.
Catherine, to just stay with you for a moment before I come to Dr. Mudavi, just a quick question to you. For the farmer, at the end of the day, it's about the yields. If they apply these chemicals and they perhaps used to get 10 bags, and ever since they started using the chemicals, they're getting 15 bags. For them, that's what matters. It's not a question of how safe are the chemicals they're using. Is it time for us to go back to the drawing board?
Exactly, and that's the point I was raising, Abby. On one hand, you remember GMO the other day, which is also meant to increase yields, was banned in Kenya, and now we have GMO cassava that is meant to increase yields for farmers, which is a big plus for the farmer, because remember, the farmer is actually doing this as a source of income, source of livelihood activity for the household. So really, for me, as I say, the farmers, they have all these options, but is it done with knowledge or education by the farmer so that they're empowered to know what is the right chemical to apply at what time and which one is regulated or not? For me, I think this is where our focus should be. We have IPM strategies also that are available, biopesticides. All that information are there, but are we empowering our farmers, our local farmers, with this knowledge? Is it available to our farmers in the form that they can actually utilize it? Remember, actually, like we have a weak extension system. Sometimes I go to the field, getting one extension officer, maybe from the county or government, you get one person covering a very large area. So sometimes they're not able to reach all the farmers. So what do farmers do? They go to the local agrovet. That's where they'll get advice. So the agrovet will tell them, oh, matawi imebadilika, go and apply this chemical. Sometimes even themselves, they don't know what they're applying or what they're recommending to the farmer. Then the farmer, who is my mother who never went to school, for example, will just go and use the chemical. Sometimes they have been told, add 60 ml, but because she doesn't know how to measure, she will add maybe more than that. So there is a concern there.
All right. And I can see the rest of the panelists are itching to respond. Dr. Catherine, very deep insights there. Let me bring in Dr. Mudavi. For the farmer who has always used the pesticides as a way of life, why are they not willing to change? Are there not sufficient alternatives?
Thank you very much, Abby, for that question. And indeed, that is one of the areas that BioVision Africa Trust, the organization I work for, and I believe you did an introduction before I came on air, and thank you very much for that. We really work with farmers in different counties in this country, about 13 of them. And if we had enough resources, we would probably spread to most of the counties in the country. Now, farmers need to be supported with information and knowledge on what alternatives are available. And when it comes to the question of inputs, and especially when you talk of chemicals, either you are talking of fertilizers, which are meant to help improve yields, improve production, and get a very healthy crop, or you are talking of chemicals that are meant to help control pests, as we know them, or you are talking of chemicals that you'd like to use to control weeds. So the question is, which enemies are the farmers fighting in order to have a sufficient yield that they're happy with? We are talking of having a soil that is very productive, a soil that is healthy, a soil that can actually give a good yield. We are talking about a crop that can grow very healthily and not looking sickly for you to go for the option of using chemical pesticides. We are also talking of having a crop or a mixture of crops which can help suppress weeds so that you don't have to look for chemical ways of controlling the weeds. So what do we do in BioVision Africa Trust with other partners even in this country, Pelham Kenya, Cowan, and others, and our own Ministry of Agriculture?
Dr. Mudavi, allow me to interject. And I just want you to drive your point home in the next 30 seconds, because I also want to hear what Madam Leila has to say before we go for a commercial break. Just make your comments very brief.
Absolutely. We try to provide information for farmers on what inputs are available for them to increase yields, but to do so in a very healthy way and to keep their soils fertile. Soil carbon, soil organic matter is very important. So the practices on which we provide information, we provide knowledge to the farmers, should be those that can help the farmers have their soils fertile, have their soils strong enough to withstand and to give the farmer a good harvest and a good crop without resorting to a lot of heavy chemical pesticides or chemical fertilizers. And that is the information, the knowledge that we do give to the farmers.
All right. And Leila, you've been, Madam Leila, you've been very passionate about this topic. I just also want to pick your mind. What is the way forward? Because on one hand, we don't want to paint a picture that use of these chemicals is extremely harmful. At the same time, we also want our crops to be healthy.
Yeah, so Abby, I just wanted to comment on this, on what Dr. Catherine said. There is no such thing as a good pesticide. Pesticides are designed to kill something, a weed or an organism or an insect, okay? But pesticides are registered based on the amount of risk we assess that they pose to the environment and to humans, and whether we accept that that level of risk is okay or not. If we decide that that risk is not okay and not worthwhile, then we must then we must look at what alternatives exist. And this is what Dr. Amudabi was alluding to. And there is increasing evidence, Abby, to show that there are alternatives to farming that can increase productivity without causing harm to people and the environment. Farming with nature. And these alternatives have been labeled anti-science since this petition has been tabled in the Kenyan parliament. They have been called anti-science. But it's important we consider them because protecting our environment is one of the greatest challenges of our time and will impact future generations in Kenya. And I would like to argue that if anything, manufacturing and using pesticides is old science. It can be done. The world has done it. And we are starting to see the negative impacts in the US and Europe specifically on biodiversity and human health. Look at the case that was well covered in the Kenyan media of Monsanto having to pay out damages for all the claims made against it because of its active ingredient glyphosate,
Yeah.
So progress, modernization, science and technology lies in our ability to innovate and to find new ways of producing food. And new ways of producing food is about using the science of nature in a healthy, safe and sustainable way.
All right. And Leila, I'll be coming back to you shortly. I'd like us to take some questions from our viewers watching us from different locations across the country. And let me read a few of the questions to our panelists, and I'm sure they'll be able to give us some concrete answers. There's a viewer watching from home, Rachel. She's asking, I have a question for Dr. Catherine. Is it worth to use pesticides? Because it seems to bring more harm than good. Another question here, someone didn't leave us with his name. Is GMO toxic? Dr. Catherine, would you want to open up the answers for us as we get your quick reactions?
Sure, Abby. As I said again, all chemicals have some toxicity level, and that's why we have limits. MRLs, we have lethal doses, we have acceptable daily intake, where if you use or if you consume beyond certain level, of course, you'll get the toxic effects, and I've mentioned a couple of toxic effects, like ability to cause cancer, mutagenic effects, effects on reproduction. So as Leila said, if we can use alternative technologies, as I said, try things like GMO or use of pesticides, then we are safer than use of pesticide. But we are not yet there, and this is where we are going as a country, and I think this is why we are having this discussion. On the issue of GMO, so far, we don't have any studies really that say that GMOs are bad. Actually, they increase productivity, they are safer, more yields for the farmers, and therefore more income, better food security. So this is something scientists have been exploring, and you remember the other day, last year late, we released the first GMO cassava, and farmers are happy that now they're able to grow GMO cassava, more yields, no pests and diseases, and better nutrition and food security. So they're having better income, because you can imagine sometimes pests and diseases can cause even 100% losses in our crops. So this is, again, we need to weigh all these facts. As a farmer, I would look at the benefits versus the harm. When we say we use risk-based approach, you have to look at, if you use the pesticides, you get more yields, yes, but on the other side, we have to worry about the risk posed by these chemicals. So we really have to be very careful, and in food safety, we use the precautionary principle, whereby if something can cause harmful effect to the human health, then you are supposed to exercise precaution in use of that chemical substance.
All right. Well, those are some of the questions we are getting so far, and we do thank our viewers back at home. Remember, to be part of this conversation, you can log in onto slido.com. Our event code is Transform Kenya. We're also available on Twitter. You can tweet at KTN News KE. You can also tweet me at Agina Abi. And we'll be taking some of your questions, your observations as we proceed with this very important discussion. Well, ladies and gentlemen, allow us to take another angle to this conversation. We've had the locust invasion in the country. It has not only affected Kenya, but the greater East Africa. Let's just listen in on this clip, and then this will be forming a key basis for our next discussions moving forward.
We have gone through 2 generations. So we are in the 2nd generation, which are flying around in the north. mostly in Samburu, Marsabit, parts of Mandera, and mainly Turkana. And we are at that stage when they have hatched and they are flying. So this is the second generation of young adults, a very ferocious stage, because this is when they are eating to build up their sizes to enable them to fly. The winds are also helpful because we don't expect them to fly backward. They usually don't fly against the wind. They fly with the wind. And so our spraying efforts and our control efforts is confined to the north, and also trying to make sure that they don't go to farms.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is the Principal Secretary for the Ministry of Agriculture, Professor Amadi Boga, just giving his comments on the issue of the locust invasion. Well, when we look at such a serious development in our agriculture and, of course, food security, this begs the question. I'd like to get Madam Kemunto to respond to this. This begs the question. We've seen the locusts ravaging most crops, especially in northern Kenya, coming all the way to western Kenya, and all this puts the farmers at risk. What sort of policy action should we drive so as to ensure we protect the farmers at the end of the day?
Oh, the audio seems to be a little shaky. You're asking about the locusts?
Correct.
Abby?
Yes. All right. My question is really around the policy interventions by the government. Have we had enough engagement, enough interaction with government when it comes to sorting out, like what we've seen, the locust invasion, on a scale of 1 to 10? How would you rate the government, and what would be the best way forward?
The issue of locusts, when they invaded our country, as consumer organizations, we tried our best to engage the Ministry of Agriculture and to see how best it could work out. Apparently, when COVID came in, it's like everything was just left aside. The issue of locusts was not dealt with again. But they concentrated on COVID. But the fact remains that locusts have been really doing a lot of damage under the area of food security, because they damage all the kind of crops. What I could really ask, we could ask the government to do is to put more efforts to ensure that they are curbed. Yes, of course, we know that I know it is in connection with pesticides. And I know that's where the question is leading to, that what can we do to control without using the pesticides? The fact is that what the government has been using to ensure that it's being controlled, the problem is that whatever efforts that have been put there, they are not good enough to curb the menace. Why am I saying this? When we had this issue of locusts, and there were not many, there were some money that was set aside. And I'm not really going after anybody here. There's money that was set aside, and this money was meant to help those who are acting on capping the locusts, to spray and ensure that they destroy them or they reduce them early enough. But what happened? What has it? And also we have some evidence that it was not put into proper use. So we are asking the Ministry of Agriculture and the ministries that have been assigned to ensure that there are no locusts in this country. Please, can you put the resources that you've been given into the right place? Can you use them for the purposes for which you are given to use? Because as consumers and as also farmers may not really be able to protect themselves. Farmers cannot be able to send away the locusts. It calls for the national government to come on board, to be proactive, and not just to wait and tell us that if you see a locust, just take a photo and we see what to do. Photo for what? Can you come out of those offices, then do what is required of you. Yes, you'll use what is required, that is the spraying, so that we can cap it. Otherwise, few months from now, we are going to encounter an acute shortage of food because of those locusts.
All right. Very, very interesting insights coming out there. And allow us to go on a quick commercial break. And when we come back, we'll be looking at some of the practical solutions when it comes to food safety in the country. Keep it locked on KTN News.
Transform Kenya. Empower our nation. This is KTN News.